Hey, Lead Up listeners, Mike Harbour on another great guest interview of the Lead Up podcast. I'm excited to welcome guest Chris Taylor with me today. He's the founder and CEO of actionable.co. We're going to talk more about what that means. We're both in the leadership or the training space, really, maybe not the leadership space, but Chris helps people like me, leaders like you, measure your results from your training, from your change initiatives, make them sticky, make them where you can see what's really working and what's not. So we don't keep doing more of what's not working. We do more of what is working. So we're going to talk about those things today from a leadership and training perspective. And I'm looking forward to learning from Chris. Hopefully he's going to teach me a few things, teach you a few things that you can take back into your workplace as well. Chris, welcome to the Lead Up podcast.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, glad you're here. It's been a pleasure kind of meeting you just briefly in the green room as we were getting ready for the show. Chris is in Canada up north.
Yep.
And I don't know if you can tell, Chris, I'm from Canada as well. I don't know if the accent shows up or not.
Distinctly Canadian. Yeah, you shine. Sure.
Southern U.S., Southern boy. So, I'm enjoying the heat as you are in Canada right now as well. Tell us a little bit about you and kind of where your career journey's been and what brought you into this company, Actionable, and what Actionable is.
Sure. Yeah. So I've had Actionable for 17 years now. Prior to that, I've been an entrepreneur sort of all my life. Had my first business at 12. And then I was a sales rep and sales trainer. And I really loved the training aspect, the people development side, not necessarily so much the product training, but the leadership role of how do you motivate, incentivize, retain top talent. And so I really sort of fell in love with that at a very young age. And then that business went really well, and then it went really poorly, which I can elaborate on, or we can save for another conversation. But that led to me being curled up in my parents' basement at the ripe age of 23, trying to figure out what had gone wrong with the world. And I started reading a lot. I'd always been a big reader, Mike, but I'd sort of stopped for a while, and now I was getting back into it. So I was reading classics, Good to Great, Seven Habits, Think and Grow Rich, like these types of books. And I became really kind of distraught with the fact that I was reading all these books and nothing was changing in my life. And then had one of those palm to forehead moments of, right, you have to do more than just read the book. You actually have to do something with the knowledge from the book. At which point I became kind of obsessed, Mike, with that transition. How do we go from I learned something to I've actually applied it so that it makes a change in my life? And so I started a website back in 2008 called actionablebooks.com. And that was all around taking ideas from popular books and putting them into practice. That led to a whole bunch of people asking me to train their people on some of the concepts from these books. And so I became, I sort of joke, an accidental trainer, where now I was out there sort of doing mashups of Jim Collins and Simon Sinek and doing a workshop on, that. And then I remember it vividly. It's about 2012, I guess. I had a past client, call me up and say, "Hey, Chris, we want to have you come back in." I said, "Great. What do we want to talk about?" They said, "Oh, the same stuff you talked about last time." I said, "Oh, okay. So new audience?" Like, no, same audience. They loved it. We want to do it again. And I thought, no, something is seriously wrong here. I'm viewing that as a major failure, that they need me to, nothing's changed, right? They're having me come back in and they're seeing it as we've got in this great entertainment, right? And so I became really obsessed then, 2012, with, okay, how do we start to move the needle with training, where it's not just about delivering great content that people enjoy, but that it's actually leading to noticeable needle moving change, and do it in a way that is visible to everyone involved. And that's basically the last 12 years now have been supporting consultants and organizations in shining a light on the impact of training programs.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to talk about the story about, being in the fetal position in your parents' basement. I think as an entrepreneur, we've all had that experience, at some level, right? Like, how am I going to pay my bills? What's
Right.
next? Oh my God, this is a failure. Why did I do this? And I'm also, what's interesting, you brought up the books, the classics that you've read. Obviously, I'm a student of all of those books and authors as well. I was just having the conversation with my wife and my son who works with me as well.
Nice.
He's a voracious student learner. He's only 23. I wish I was where he is at when I was 23 years old. But, we were talking about, the whole idea of be, do, have, right? And, I was talking about a kind of a coach I've had in the past that really pushed the idea of, just manifest things into your life. And that's all well and good. I believe in, the law of vibration, attraction,
Sure.
manifestation, but you got to take action, by
You
the
got to
way.
do. Yeah,
You got to
exactly.
do something. You can't just read the book and vibrate yourself into success, right? I
Yeah.
mean, your action has to be moved in that right direction. And that's I talk about those kind of things a lot in the training that I do. I'm going into organizations like we're going to talk about principles of leadership or communication or teamwork or motivation or whatever it is.
Sure.
And you got to get your mind in the right frame to be able to go do that, but you got to go do it too. You got to take
Right.
some action because until you go fail and get some experience, you don't know how to, you know, to repeat and rinse and repeat is what I call it. Go
Yeah.
go rinse what you did and repeat it and get a little bit better
Yeah.
each time. So talk to me a little bit about why most training fails.
Yeah. So, for a little bit of context, for those who don't know Actionable, we're a technology platform that supports and measures behavior change off training programs. Last year, there was about, I don't know, 9,000 programs or something across about 700 organizations that use the platform. So we sit at the epicenter of a whole lot of data around what works and what doesn't on actually driving change. And I don't think you actually need any of that data to sort of intuit why a lot of these programs work. I talk about the New Year's Eve moment, right, in the training room, where you've got, as a facilitator, or if you're a leader and your people are in a training session, you've got people they've gone away to training. There's a moment in the room in the hands of a good facilitator where they are inspired, they have exceptional intent, right? They're just like, this resonates, I'm going to go back and change the world. Or they'll make a statement like, I'm going to be a better leader, or I'm going to be a better listener. And awesome, that's a great intention. The problem is that you don't do better leader, right? You become a better leader through a series of small behavioral changes. But too often, just like a New Year's Eve resolution, right? Of I'm going to get in shape. It's like, okay, well, you're already a shape. So what do you mean get in shape, and what's actually involved in doing that? And that's where most people fall down. So one of the biggest reasons why a lot of training programs don't actually drive the change that we want is because people leave the room inspired but not equipped for the hard work, which is to actually do the work, right, when they get back, of integrating what they learned into their day-to-day practice. And particularly when you're working with people that have been, doing what they do for 10, 15, 20 years, they've got some very ingrained habits that we're now trying to break them of. And they
Mm-hmm.
may have the desire to break them of that. But, I've got some buddies who really want to quit smoking, but haven't, because the habits are ingrained, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the two parts there. One, I don't think we're, as a industry, setting people up super well when they leave the room. We build action plans, great, but those are tasks, not behavioral changes. And then secondly, we're not equipping them with tools to make it easier for them to actually make that change happen after they've left the room. With the one exception of one-on-one coaching, supporting learners post-session, amazing, right? You've got the accountability, you've got the sounding board, and it's justifiably expensive. So therefore, it doesn't get to everybody, or it doesn't last long enough to create the long change that we want to create. So that's why we created Actionable, was to address those two needs. Let's help people translate good intention into a commitment to a daily practice. And then let's support them as they go through the inevitable ups and downs of actually practicing that new behavior.
Yeah. And we could go a lot of different directions. I can think of, so many of we all know this. Okay. Lead up listeners know I talk about this a lot. We're all creatures of habit. 90% of everything we do is habit. We want something better, but we never really replace that bad habit with a good habit. We
Yeah.
don't set maybe good intention. We don't have accountability in our life to really help us get through those rough periods, because it is hard, right? I get up I sat down on the couch at night. I'm like, I'm not going to eat that bowl of ice cream. And before you know it, I've eaten a bowl of ice cream without even thinking about it. Right. So
Yeah.
the habit takes over. Not me. I don't do that, Chris. I'm just talking about people, right? Other people.
Someone I heard of once
Yeah.
does that, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So how does the actionable tool really help instill new habits in behavior for people too? Because it really is about habit. I mean, we have to transform our habits of not having the let's tie it to leadership for a minute.
Yeah,
Not
sure.
having the difficult conversation when an employee's not performing well to
Yeah,
having the difficult conversation. I teach a principle called shovel the pile while it's small, Chris. That's a
nice.
principle I teach, right? In having difficult conversations. And I got that. I grew up on a small farm. I'll tell you a quick story. I grew up on a small farm. We had a chicken house. And my dad said, Michael, you need to get out there and shovel that pile of manure before it gets too big. Right. And what he was really saying is that job's going to be hard if you don't get the manure out of the chicken house. It's going to get stinky. It's going to get big. The job's going to get harder.
Sure.
I kind of use that as a story to set up, Chris, if you don't have that hard conversation with that employee that's abusing everybody else on
Yeah.
the team or not showing up on time or not pulling their weight, that pile gets bigger and bigger and bigger, not with just that employee, but also the other team members that
Yeah.
are seeing you not do anything.
100%.
So let's take that example.
Yeah.
What it is it's a skill. I can teach the skill, but
Yep.
then we also have to teach the habit of doing that in
Yeah.
small bits. So how would you take something like that with your tool actionable
Yeah.
and back it up with behavior change that people can see?
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. That's a great example. So I want to separate task from habit. And I think a lot of people leave trainings with pages of notes, and there's a mashup in there of tasks and habits. The task is something that you do once and it's done. You can literally check it off and done. Like have the difficult conversation with Bob is a task, not a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to do the task. And there's an undercurrent there, though, where, avoidance behavior in this example potentially, or, not tuning into the broader team dynamic or whatever the specific issue might be that underlies why they haven't actually had that conversation.
Kicking the can down the road. I'll wait until Monday on a Friday. Well, Monday comes. We'll wait
Sure.
until Friday to have all of those things. Yeah. So
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, not at all. It's great. Yeah, so we want to identify that underlying behavior and then tackle the behavior in something that can be done daily, regardless of the specific tasks that we're trying to do. So an example for that individual might be the commitment to behavior change that they might make is when I'm packing up at the end of the day, instead of mentally transitioning to the drive home or whatever, I will spend 3 minutes reviewing my meetings from the day and identifying where I avoided having the difficult conversation. So that's a reflection-based behavior. You can also do it at the beginning of the day where it's as I'm sitting down at my desk, I'll look forward in my calendar and say, where do I need to lean into a difficult conversation? The behavioral shift is actually not about an individual conversation, because if we make the behavior commitment around have the difficult conversation, it would suggest that I have to have a difficult conversation every day in order to develop this habit, right? So instead, what I find most sort of commonly useful for behavior change in leadership in particular is the act of noticing or pre-planning how I'm going to show up in those type of engagements.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be it, right? So they would leave with two parts. They'd leave with the task of book the meeting with Bob, and then they would leave with the habit of noticing how I'm showing up with that behavior or the behavior that I want to have. I can unpack the when instead of I will structure, but that's the sort of short answer of how I would tackle that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. So your tool,
All right.
your platform, we're putting
So
behaviors in. Is
yeah,
it giving reminders to people to
that's right.
do the pre-planning thought? How does it work? Give me a little bit of
Yeah.
example for our
So
listeners.
for sure. So we'll use you as the example. So you're the consultant delivering a training to a client. And so Mike knows ahead of time what the content themes are for this module that you're going to run, right? This session that you're doing, there's these three topics. One of them is leaning into tough conversations or, shoveling the pile before it gets too big. That could literally be the theme, right? That you've got. And then you would pre-craft some commitment options. Like, what does that look like as a daily practice using the example we just did of when this happens instead of this, all this. You load that up beforehand, you get into the session, In the session, you put a QR code up on the screen. Your participants scan the QR code on their phone because everyone learned how to do that during the pandemic when we went to restaurants.
Right, right.
Right. And then it brings up commitment choices. It's almost like a little menu of commitments that I could choose from based on the content I just experienced. This is really critical, Mike, because if people are being told to shift the behavior, we're like a dog being pushed at we back away, right? We don't want to do the thing we're told to do, but if we choose the thing we want to work on, then we lean in. And so this is intrinsic motivation, as you know all about. So they're going to choose one of the commitments. They're going to personalize it to themselves. They're going to have a conversation in the room around what I'm committing to and why it matters, build a little social accountability, and then they leave the room. So that's in the platform now has captured what everyone's committed to. In the weeks following the session, they're going to get pinged by the system. It's going to put back in front of them. It's going to say, hey, Jane, you said this was important to you. How's it going today? And this does two things. One, it brings it back to Jane's mind because she's got 85 other things going on. She goes, right. I did say I was going to do that. So it keeps it top of mind. And it asks her to rate her progress. So she feels a sense of growth and mastery as she goes, and she can journal if she wants, but it's 15 seconds a couple times a week, right? It's a low touch, but it's keeping it top of mind. And because as Jane, I chose that commitment, I'm actually happy to get those nudges. It's not a thing I'm being told to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then Mike, the consultant, and the purchaser inside the client organization can see in real time, however you want to organize the data, what are people working on? How are they getting on with it? Where are the wins? Where are people falling down? So that there can be some intervention as appropriate. If they have a coach, the coach can see it and the coach can support them. And so what we're really doing is we're shining that light on the typically invisible process of individual behavior change that's happening following each session. And then the last piece on it, although I could talk about this for hours, the last piece on it is that when you go into your next session with that group, you can bring the aggregate report to the session so that everyone in the group has a chance to see it. And so when you're asking them, how's it been going since the last time we got together, you're not asking blind. You can see it. You can point to it. You can say, Julie, it looks like you had this great breakthrough. Do you want to share that with the group? And so you get more context rich, if you will, information on that.
That's good. That's good. So let's go back to the C-level executive that is buying training. They're buying Chris to come in and motivate and inspire their employees to do something different, but they're not seeing, that behavior change after you leave. Let's talk about the cost of that, like the cost of not seeing a return, not implementing some accountability or alignment after, the trainer leaves, and then how what you do helps them really improve that return on investment.
Yeah, I think I want to start. I want to make the assumption that the goal of each training is to drive change, because I think we do that, and hopefully our buyers do as well, or the people inside the organization make that assumption. But I find there's a lot of value in explicitly calling it out. And so one of the first questions that I encourage someone pitching a program to a buyer, whether it's internal, leader trying to get it from executive or vendor to client, is to ask the question, with this leadership program, are you looking for someone to deliver training, or are you trying to drive change? And let them answer. Most of the time, I go, no, drive change, of course, drive change. Okay, great. The reason I think that really obvious question is so important at the front end is it gets everyone aligned around the fact that the point here is to drive change. And the obvious sort of idea in this is that change happens after the session. We inspire it in the room, we catalyze it in the room, but the change happens after they leave. And so if we've asked that question, then it kind of becomes, well, if the point is to drive change, how are we not supporting, measuring, the change efforts following the session? As far as the cost of not doing those things, I think, most people in this space have been on the receiving end of it. Budgets get cut or frozen, programs get pushed down the road. You end up with your learning and development investments being a nice to have as opposed to a must have. They're not strategically aligned necessarily. And so it's when we have cash and capacity, we'll do that. And both of those things have been a little tight lately, right? And I don't think capacity is going to become more. So the other, I think, some people go, well, at least it's neutral if we don't support and measure change. They still had a good time in the room, maybe. But what I found is that it starts to create a cultural norm. You were talking earlier, Mike, about, if you don't address that problematic employee, it starts to create ripples with the broader team, right? I think the same thing happens when you run a training and don't focus on supporting. Measuring is great, but supporting behavior change after. If you're not supporting it, you're making a statement that we're doing this to put people in a room, not to drive change. And so the company starts to become apathetic towards this. They're like, well, it's a training, but that's just really a day off from work, right? Which is not, so it creates this almost like doom loop where no one's winning, right? No one's benefiting from this investment. I don't know, that answer
Yeah.
your question?
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I think from an attendee standpoint, look, I've been doing what I do for a long time, and
Yeah,
from an attendee standpoint, they get tired of, oh, this is just another training, or
100%.
we've done this before, we've not done anything with it. The people that really need this don't do anything because they're not held accountable and those kind of things. So,
Yeah,
again, I like what you're doing. I like what you're talking. It's certainly something I know I could do a better job of helping drive accountability. I work really hard when I go into it because I see myself as a change maker, not not a content deliverer. That's really what I want to be and feel like I am. And so I work really, I have companies all the time. They call me, hey, can you come in and do some training? And I ask them that, you just want me to come in and train people? Because I can do that, but I just want you to know you're just going to frustrate them when I do that, because I'm going to teach things that are going to be, kind of noodle shaking up ideas. And then they're going to want support from you, the
yeah,
C leader, to help them implement those things. And so let's talk about how I can come in and partner with you to really affect change within the
yeah,
organization, because I think that's really what they want.
yeah.
But they think just by, well, let's just kind of microwave our people for a day. Let's warm them up a little bit, and then 5 hours later they've gone back to the office where the same problems occur, and they're cold again, right? And
Yep.
so, what are some of the best practices out there, Chris, that you've seen with your clients that you're working with to really make learning stick, make the training sticky
Yep.
for years to come, not just for
Yep.
a quarter, so that because I talk to companies about, let's not do a flavor of the month or flavor of the quarter. Let's engage, and I'm really trying to engage with my clients for a year, 2 years, 3 years
Yeah.
at a time, to really help them drive cultural change. But what are some of the best practices you see work out there to really make it stick?
Yeah. So these are now data driven from the actionable platform. So and then not any particular order, but if you think about the learner's brain as a shot glass, when you've got a pitcher of water that you're trying to pour into that shot glass, it ain't all sticking, right?
Mm-hmm.
So piece number one is, wherever possible, let's stop doing 4 day, consecutive day intensives and then nothing for 8 to 12 months. I think what you were just describing, not I think, what's very apparent in the data is that if we can go to shorter format where we're hitting a couple key concepts, letting them choose from that, and then getting back together again next month, next quarter, etc., but keeping it going where people are choosing one commitment to behavior change, focusing on building that for 30 days, do the next one, do the next one. I think, yeah, you get into logistics of people management and all of that, and I get that. So you can have kickoff events, but don't expect that if you're going to do a 3 day intensive because you wanted to get everybody together, that they're going to remember 90% of what you covered in that session. So if you need to do the 3 day, do another 6 1 hour sessions virtually over the next 6 months where you're not teaching anything that new. You're
Mm.
revisiting key concepts. That's super powerful. Number two is cohort size. We see a very aggressive decline in retention or value for the participant when you cross 20 participants in the room. So putting 1,000 people in a Zoom meeting and expecting the change is going to happen is just a fool's errand. So that's number two. Number three, when you are actually scoping the project, budget for sustainment, right?
Mm.
If it can be an additive to the session, great. But if it can't, can you strip out a coffee break, or can you take out one of the, we budget for assessments, we budget for the delivery and facilitation and transportation for that. In so many cases, we don't budget for the activation of the learning. And we've found it doesn't have to be a lot, but 10, 15% of the overall budget applied against the month or two following the session, will pay it's worth its weight in gold, right? Those are the dividends that will come through for you. I could probably go on, but those are my three big ones that leaders can apply right out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Look, we have a lot of listeners that are trying to figure out, okay, we know we need to train our people. I know the one thing that, especially in the States where I'm at, and I'm sure it's this way in Canada as well. I don't talk to a lot of people outside the US, but what I know, and especially in the sector that I work, which is healthcare primarily.
Yep.
During the pandemic, every organization realized we got to do a better job of developing our people, training our people. They do kind of what you described. For years and years they've been doing what they call LDIs, Leadership Development Institutes, and it's kind of a once a quarter,
Right.
full day, feed them with the fire hose type of event. And I've really been I try to do these things like what I call ignite groups, where we're meeting in smaller groups,
Yeah,
in shorter time frames, over a longer runway, where we're really igniting practice and principle and hopefully behavior change in the lives of the leaders that we're working with. What I don't have is the tool that you're talking about, where it's really able to measure that. Typically what I'm doing, and so I'm going to let you kind of challenge me on this with an organization. I'll go in with them and say, okay, let's look at your employee engagement numbers. Let's look at your turnover numbers, your retention, your loss of, from productivity. And so when I come in and do my work, you should see an improvement in all of those kind of KPIs. And so I'm kind of letting them measure the results with their own KPIs, right? That's
awesome.
That's about as much as I'm doing right now. But so what would you say to that? I mean, what's good about that? What's not good about that? How will some of the practices and things that you teach help benefit them in a better way?
I love the fact that you're anchoring it to their metrics, because that's the holy grail, right? We want to be able to show that your workshop or program, led to these improvements in quantifiable metrics that they can put a dollar value to.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with what you're doing. The challenge that exists with it in many cases is the time delay between when you run the workshop or program and when that actually shows up on their KPIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I talked to a client the other day where they wanted to improve metrics on their employee engagement survey. They'd done a ton of work. They could quantify like dollar value of moves on their employee engagement survey. They did that before us. Great. They come in, they do a program with one of the consultants we work with. Actionable's a part of that. They had just done their employee engagement survey like a month ago. So they're not doing it for another year, right? So first of all, we've got at least a year before we see that improvement. And then we found out that it takes them about 4 months to process the results of that employee engagement survey and publish them. So you're looking at like 16 months now before you have the ability to measure impact. And then 16 months later, the CFO goes, yeah, but there's a million things that have happened since then. So how do we know that that program drove that improvement?
Yeah,
Right?
you weren't responsible for that, right?
Right, exactly. So anchoring to an internally driven KPI, ideally one that has a dollar value, is gold, and that's the anchor. But then we need to fill in all of that blank space between the date of training and the date of the results on that employee engagement survey. And so we do that with Actionable's Habit Builder. We have this self-recorded progress. So basically participant confidence that they're seeing behavior change. We build in 360 components. So we have observable behavior change. And then you have the KPI data. And then we want to look at that data, not on a person by person basis, but it sort of clustered. So can we look at, the Northeast region versus the Southwest? We did a program with a casino right around the time of the pandemic, and they had massive turnover, like more than industry norm. And it was costing them about $6 million a year beyond what it should have been, right? If they were at industry norm. They were investing in a frontline leader program, 176 leaders. Those leaders could be bucketed or sort of clustered into, are they on the AM shift, the PM shift, or the graveyard shift? Are they in food and beverage, or are they in gaming? So we could take those 176 leaders and organize them into clusters, 6 clusters. And then we looked at which behaviors those clusters were disproportionately working on and map that to the improvement in retention metrics.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts to give you, be like, again, we're not stating direct causality, like this definitely did that and nothing else. Of course, there's external factors, but there's enough correlation when you're measuring what happens between the session and the KPIs that anybody who's willing to look goes, oh, there's probably something here. We should double down. We should get that Mike guy back again, and we should expand this out to here or there. And that's what we see more often than not with the consultants that we work with, is that they get invited back faster and more often to their clients because that data visibility becomes almost addictive, right? Clients want to see that change.
Yeah, that's good. So, Chris, man, we could probably talk all day because I'm loving.
Likewise.
I'm kind of a, I'm an analytical guy with a driver mindset, right? I mean, I want to drive things forward, but I like to have information to prove that it works. So
Yeah,
I don't have the expertise nor the time to figure some of these things out, but I'm sure we could talk a lot and I'd learn a lot from you. But let's talk about how people get engaged with you. So many organizations that I talk to, they've got their own internal learning and development people, right?
yep,
So they don't necessarily need a guy like me. They might bring me in for a day event to do a speech or something, but they're going to do all the follow up coaching and training and those kind of things. Then there's people like me. So talk about how you engage with those two subsets and how people can find out more about doing that with you.
for sure. Yeah, thanks. So up until about 2 years ago, we worked pretty much exclusively with folks like you, Mike. So we worked with the consultants or trainers, then we became part of their offering when they went to their industry clients. About 2 years ago, we started working directly with learning and development teams or organizational development teams or OE teams, but internal teams, usually in the HR change function.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can absolutely serve both groups. We are a little unique in the sense that it's a technology at its core, but as you've pointed out a few times, there's methodology to it as well. So we do the training of the consultants or the L&D people around how to maximize and measure behavior change. And then Actionable, the technology, is a platform to help them do that. So the short version, you can reach out. It's probably LinkedIn is the best. If you search Chris Taylor Actionable, you'll find me. I'm fairly active there. If you want to go to actionable.co, please do. If you're in industry, if you're in an L&D function and you go to actionable.co, all the language speaks to consultants. But never fear, we do work directly with usually about a dozen end clients a year as well.
Right on, right on. Well, Chris, man, I'm sure we could talk a lot longer. Any last thoughts you have for leaders out there right now, just trying to figure out how to make their way forward in you know, a tight budget space?
Yeah.
What you're prescribing to people helps them kind of put money on the bottom line because that's really, that's how they make decisions, right? It may not be uh, one of the things is maybe how they can drive some change at scale in a faster way, right? Versus, well, we don't have the 18 months to wait until
Right.
we see change. So just that one last question there, how they can really use, what you have in a budget friendly way, but really get the most impact.
Yeah, I think, and you don't need to use the actual technology for this. If you're thinking about a business problem that you believe you can solve for by developing your people, you're clear on the business problem, and you probably jump to what's the content or who's the content provider that we want to go to. There's a layer in between around what behaviors do we believe need to shift? How do people need to be acting differently in order to achieve that outcome? And then what content is most likely to trigger those behaviors? If you just add that one step in on any of your considerations, whether it's internal or external, if you're looking at developing your people, put the emphasis on the behaviors you're trying to change and the content that drives that, as opposed to the content, and sort of leave it at that.
Yeah, man, I love that because you just made me think, and it's something I say a lot. There's a lot of people in the world that do what I do,
Mhm.
but what we learn is not near as important as who we learn from.
Right.
Right? I mean, there's a lot of books out there on leadership. There's a lot of trainers out there that do leadership training, but who you learn from is more important than what the content is, right? I mean, content's got to be effective, but there are a lot of people that can deliver content but can't make it actionable.
Yeah.
They can't, they don't understand the whole idea of around behavior change. I think I said to you, I consider myself a change maker, not a content deliverer, right? I mean,
Yep.
I'm I've got a book that I wrote, Quit Losing Talent, 20 Tactics to Win, Win and Keep and Inspire Great Employees. And every tactic has an action guide,
Yeah.
like, so it's not just the content. Here's the action. Here's how here's what you got to do to take action to really change your retention, your recruitment, your onboarding of people in the organization. So, you kind of spoke to my heart there when you said that, because I'm a believer. There's a lot of people that do what I do. There's not many people out there that are as good as I am at really helping drive change out there. There are some people that are better, by the way, Chris, but I don't know who they are. I'm not going to tell you who they are. But anyway, man, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you making time today and helping me understand what you do a little bit more and helping our listeners understand how to drive change in their organizations to make training stick. Actionable.co. And LinkedIn, Chris Taylor, Actionable on LinkedIn as well. And we'll make sure we share those links in the show notes. And Chris, if you've got any other resources you'd like for us to share with our listeners, please do so. We'll make sure that happens. Thanks for a great conversation.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.